When people think of Japanese naval power in World War II, one image dominates history: the aircraft carrier decks of Pearl Harbor, planes lifting into the morning sky, and an empire at its peak. But the Imperial Japanese Navy was far more than a carrier force. It was a carefully constructed fleet built around speed, long-range firepower, and decisive battle doctrine. From fragile destroyers and deadly submarines to the largest battleships ever constructed, Japan deployed one of the most diverse and ambitious naval arsenals in history. Some of these warships were technological masterpieces. Others were rush designs built as Japan's industrial base collapsed under blockade and bombing. Many were lost not to enemy guns but to fuel shortages, air power, and a war Japan was never prepared to sustain. These ships were designed for a single purpose: to win a short, decisive war at sea. This is the complete catalog of every major Japanese warship type used in World War II. And it begins long before the first bombs fell on Pearl Harbor. Before World War II, Japan believed naval wars would be decided by a single massive fleet engagement. To make that possible, the Imperial Japanese Navy invested heavily in fast, heavily armed escort vessels. Japanese destroyers were among the most advanced in the world. Unlike their Western counterparts, they were designed not just for escort duty, but for aggressive night attacks. Armed with the infamous long-range oxygen-fueled torpedoes, these ships could strike enemy fleets from distances previously thought impossible. Light cruisers served as command ships for destroyer squadrons. Though lightly armored, they carried powerful torpedo armaments and excellent optics, making them deadly in night combat. This doctrine emphasized speed, coordination, and surprise, an approach that would prove devastating in the war's early years. But it also came with a flaw: survivability was often sacrificed for offensive power. Japanese heavy cruisers were the backbone of surface combat operations. They were fast, well-armed, and optimized for long-range engagements. Their guns rivaled those of enemy cruisers, but it was their torpedo armament that made them uniquely dangerous. Japanese cruisers carried more torpedoes than any other navy, and crews were trained extensively in night fighting. In early battles across the Pacific, these ships inflicted catastrophic losses on Allied fleets that underestimated them. However, this offensive focus left them vulnerable. Armor protection was limited, and once air power became dominant, cruisers operating without sufficient air cover became easy targets. By mid-war, many of Japan's most powerful cruisers had been sunk far from home waters. Japanese battleship design reflected absolute faith in the decisive fleet battle. Early battleships were modernized aggressively during the interwar years, gaining new engines, improved armor, and anti-aircraft weapons. But the true symbols of Japanese naval ambition were the super battleships. Built in near-total secrecy, these vessels were larger and more heavily armed than any battleship ever constructed. Their guns could fire shells weighing as much as a small car, designed to obliterate enemy ships before they could respond. Yet these giants rarely fought the battles they were built for. As aircraft carriers replaced battleships as the decisive weapon at sea, Japan's most powerful surface ships spent much of the war hiding from air attack, conserving fuel, or acting as floating deterrents. When they finally sailed into combat, it was often too late and against overwhelming air power. No navy entered World War II with a more experienced carrier force than Japan. Japanese carrier aviation doctrine emphasized elite pilot training, long-range strikes, and coordinated mass attacks. Early in the war, this gave Japan a decisive advantage. Fleet carriers formed the core of Japan's offensive power. They enabled rapid expansion across Southeast Asia and delivered the devastating blow at Pearl Harbor. Light carriers and converted carriers expanded Japan's reach, filling gaps in fleet coverage and supporting invasions. But Japan's carrier strength rested on one fragile foundation: its pilot. Carrier pilots were trained to an extraordinary standard, but the system produced too few replacements. As veteran air crews were lost in battles like Midway and the Solomon Islands, Japan was unable to replace them. By late war, carriers still floated, but their air wings were shadows of what they once were. Japanese submarines were technologically advanced with excellent range and powerful torpedoes. Some were designed as fleet submarines, others as long-range scouts. Japan even developed submarine aircraft carriers, an idea decades ahead of its time. But doctrine failed them. Rather than targeting merchant shipping, Japanese submarines focused on enemy warships. This decision drastically limited their strategic impact. While Allied submarines strangled Japan's economy, Japanese submarines sank comparatively little tonnage. By war's end, many advanced submarine designs remained underutilized, victims of flawed strategic priorities. As Allied submarines devastated Japanese shipping, Japan rushed to build escort vessels. These ships were simpler, slower, and lightly armed, but they were essential. Unfortunately, they arrived late and in insufficient numbers. Poor sonar, limited training, and fuel shortages further reduced their effectiveness. Auxiliary ships, tankers, repair ships, and supply vessels became prime targets. As these ships were destroyed, Japan's fleet slowly starved, unable to maneuver or fight effectively. By 1945, many warships were immobilized not by enemy fire but by lack of fuel. As defeat loomed, Japanese shipbuilding shifted from quality to desperation. Simplified destroyers, escort carriers, and coastal defense vessels were rushed into service. Construction standards dropped, crews received minimal training. Some vessels were designed solely for suicide missions, reflecting how far Japanese naval doctrine had collapsed. These ships rarely influenced the outcome of battles, but they revealed the extreme pressures facing Japan's war economy. Unlike Germany's army or Japan's ground forces, the Imperial Japanese Navy was largely destroyed before the war ended. Most surviving ships were sunk at anchor, bombed in port, or scuttled after surrender. The decisive fleet battle Japan had planned for decades never truly happened. Instead, air power, submarines, and industrial superiority dismantled the fleet piece by piece. The Imperial Japanese Navy entered World War II as one of the most powerful fleets ever assembled. It was fast, lethal, and expertly trained, but it was also built for a short war, one decisive victory followed by negotiation. When that victory failed to materialize, Japan lacked the industrial depth, fuel reserves, and pilot replacement system needed to continue the fight. From sleek destroyers and deadly cruisers to colossal battleships and legendary carriers, Japanese warships remain some of the most fascinating naval designs in history. They were weapons of brilliance and of tragic miscalculation. Which Japanese warship do you think best represented the strengths and fatal flaws of the Imperial Japanese Navy? Let me know in the comments, and if you want complete military catalogs and documentary-style breakdowns like this, subscribe to the Military Index.